Hello, and welcome to the North Asia Cape Need to Know series. I'm Amber Older. The North Asia Cape is committed to helping New Zealand businesses internationalize in China, Japan, and Korea. As part of this commitment, we host a monthly series of expert talks. Dr. Joe Burton is an expert on regional responses to cybersecurity, cyber warfare, and other transnational security challenges. His talk, Cybersecurity, What You Need to Know, canvassed a range of issues that many companies in New Zealand face. Dr. Joe Burton joins me now. Welcome.
Good morning, nice to be here.
In your talk, you noted that the World Economic Forum report on risk shows that cyber attacks are of the highest concern among business leaders in advanced economies, ahead of terrorist attacks. So what kind of evidence is there to support this level of concern?
Well, we've had a growing number of fairly severe global cybersecurity incidents, things like the WannaCry ransomware virus in 2017. Spread to over 150 countries, cost likely upwards of $4 billion globally. We've had increasing global losses in terms of cybercrime and cyber attacks. Some figures suggest that the global market in cybercrime could rise to about $6 trillion by the end of the next decade. So businesses globally are sustaining ever-growing losses in cybersecurity, and I think one of the things that's really come into the mix in the last few years is the involvement of state actors and some very tense geopolitics around this. We've of course had cyber subversion of the US election process in 2016. We've had cyber attacks being increasingly used in military conflicts in places like Georgia and the Ukraine. And state actors like North Korea again sponsoring cyber attacks against the banking and finance sector. There was a recent loss by a Bangladeshi bank of about $81 million. So given the overall scope of it, the geopolitics and the losses that are involved, I think is expected that businesses would be taking this area very seriously now.
And yet, given the huge implications for businesses in terms of cost and impact, risk, most businesses don't have cyber insurance. Why?
Yes, I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily it's complacency. I think that there is a need for more businesses to take cyber risk seriously. I think one of the problems is an overall lack of knowledge in the sector about what cybersecurity entails and what sort of risks there are. It's also, I think, quite difficult to quantify cyber risks. So if you're a risk analyst going into a firm and looking to see what an individual's company's exposure is to a data breach or a distributed denial of service attack that knocks their website or server down for a period of time, it's quite difficult to quantify the actual financial impact of that. So I think it's a lack of knowledge. I think it's also quite difficult to get sometimes. I think it's something that many insurers will not want to insure or not be able to insure in some circumstances. And I think, again, you know, people need to take the issue more seriously. There's a whole range of financial losses that can stem from these sorts of cyber breaches, including reputational loss of your people's customers, distrust from consumers or partners if you're subject to a major data breach. So it is something that companies need to take seriously, and I think it's probably just a general lack of knowledge in the sector about the risks involved.
And in terms of New Zealanders' exposure and response to cyber insecurity, you gave some quite sobering statistics. 1 in 5 Kiwis will be affected annually. 50% of businesses in New Zealand don't have an incident response plan for cyber attacks. At a board level, there seems to be insufficient information about how to manage and respond to this kind of issue. And 40% of businesses think that they're likely to be subjected to a cyber incident. So how did we get to this place of high exposure and seemingly low response or preparedness? Yeah,
well, I think part of it is the rapid evolution of cyber threats. We've seen the global cyber market growing quite rapidly. The amount of financial losses going up rapidly. The technology is changing. We're seeing something like 18 million new variants of malware come on the market each quarter, and these are very difficult to defend against. Again, there's I think a lack of overall awareness that particularly the financial sector, healthcare, tourism, these sectors are real targets for hackers and cyber criminals, and I don't think that's probably been absorbed by the business community yet. And the other thing that comes into this is to do with higher exposure, I think, is we still face very severe skills shortages in the cyber security market. By some estimates, we're talking about 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity jobs globally. So there's a real lack of people with the skills and knowledge to put cybersecurity on the agenda for companies and actually to deal with cybersecurity issues in companies. So I think that's part of the overall exposure as well, and it's something at my university we're obviously trying to do to help train people and equip people with the skills to be able to enhance cybersecurity in various sectors.
So it isn't enough to simply store everything in the cloud?
No, I mean, this is a trend recently. We are seeing people using cloud storage increasingly, but in many ways, cloud storage sites are just as insecure as our personal computers, our laptops or our mobile phones. One of the issues, obviously, if you're storing data in the cloud, is you're often storing it. It's not actually a cloud; it's a server that exists in another country. If it's Google Drive, for example, the servers are probably in the United States. So there's a problem if you do store data in the cloud of overall responsibility if something goes wrong. Who do you hold account? It's much more difficult to do that if the company is in a different country.
And on that note, our engagement with multiple devices for our work, for our play, for our lives, you mentioned that our use of multiple devices is increasing the risk of cyber insecurity. So how do we deal with this vulnerability?
Yeah, well, it's a difficult problem where we've probably got around 8 billion internet-connected devices on the planet at the moment, and that's projected to rise to about 20 billion again in the next decade. So we're probably going to have 3 internet-connected devices, over 3 per person on the planet, which is again a phenomenal growth. It's a hugely profitable market. But we have problems securing our phones, securing our computers and our laptops. How are we going to build security or cybersecurity standards into other internet-connected devices? Cybersecurity is a technical problem, but it's very much a human one, and we're also seeing a big rise in things like social engineering, where hackers will be looking at your social media information and personalizing hacks based on information you've been posting yourself online, personalizing phishing attacks, for example. So yeah, we need to recognize that technically we need to secure a wider range of devices, but the attack surface that is presented is created as much by the people that are using those devices as the devices themselves. Yeah.
So if you were starting a business in New Zealand,
Yeah.
what would be the first 3 steps that you would take in terms of trying to ensure cybersecurity for your company?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think firstly having a single person that has overall responsibility for cybersecurity within that company is important. Often in large companies, it's the chief information security officer, but having someone that's really the point of contact for driving cybersecurity standards within an organisation, I think that's really important. Training is obviously a huge issue, making sure that your employees are aware of the potential for cyber breaches. Again, according to statistics, most of the cyber breaches in New Zealand result from, again, phishing scams, clicking on a dodgy link that comes in an email. If we can just raise awareness among employees about the potential for cyber systems to be subverted through those kind of simple processes, we could cut out a lot of the problems. And I think the third thing is having a policy framework around this, making sure that your company has a policy to enhance cybersecurity. That might be not using USB drives, that might be not having personal email at work, those sorts of things, and making sure employees are clear about what's expected and what's not expected in terms of cybersecurity standards.
And finally, for the person watching this interview now, what would be the best advice that you can give about being cyber secure?
Well, I don't know whether the statistic's entirely accurate, but it's often thrown around. But it's that something like 80% of global cybercrime could be stopped if people just patched their software and changed their passwords regularly. So in terms of simple advice, that's probably the most important thing. Make sure you're not using the same passwords for multiple devices. Make sure you're updating your passwords regularly, and make sure your operating systems are patched. The reason, i.e. Have the security updates onto your systems. One of the reasons that WannaCry, for example, had such a global impact because it affected the Windows XP operating system. So often Windows will offer, for personal computers at least, free upgrades to the next operating system, and they'll deliver your security patches regularly. Make sure you implement those patches, and that could cut out actually quite a lot of the problems we're seeing. Quite a simple fix, really.
Fantastic. Yep. Dr. Joe Burton, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Cheers.